Today we're going to read Genesis 38 through 40. And like we've told you before, the Bible is not really a children's book. And so we're reading a story today that is very interesting, and we're going to change some of it. So you older ones, you've heard this before, and you kind of know the details. And when we go through and we discuss it, we can talk some more about what's going on. All right, so it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name And she conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. And yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chazib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." What do we call that? What kind of marriage?
I don't remember.
Levirate marriage, where the brother goes and marries the dead brother's wife, if he has had no children. Right, and it's not called levirate marriage yet because there is no law, right? And so it'll be called levirate marriage later. But apparently this is kind of a custom in order to preserve a lineage in the ancient world that gets codified into the law. So Judah took his firstborn, and named her Tamar, but Judah's son, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go do the levirate marriage thing." But Onan knew that the children would not be his. So when he went into his brother's wife, he decided to play games instead. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. And then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up." For he feared that he would die, like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. So Judah said, "There's something wrong with that one." And he blamed her for the death of his first two sons. Right now, it's not apparent yet if that's the case. But he tells her, "Go and remain in your father's house." Why would he tell her that? And he's basically saying, go act like you have been divorced. Right? Go act like you're not part of our family anymore. And at some point in the future, I'll bring you back. Right? So he doesn't want her in his house anymore. He thinks that she is the problem. But when you read through the text, it's his sons who are the problem. So in the world, in particular with parents, they're very rarely willing to admit that it is their children that are the problem. Right? When you get into a situation and maybe two kids get in a fight, the parent's inclination is to defend their own child, isn't it? So you just have to realize in life that people's relationships affect their sense of justice. And people will often defend their kin instead of defending what is right. Okay? And that it's not always the case, but that is often the case. Right? All right, so, verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. And when Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers and his friend Hira the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil. And wrapping herself up, she sat in the entrance to Enaim, which is in the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, but she had not been given to him in marriage, right? So she finally figured out, oh, Judah thinks I'm the problem. When Judah saw her, he thought that she was a nice lady, for she had covered her face like the nice ladies do. And he went in to see her and said, "Come, let's play Monopoly." And so he went in and they played Monopoly. And then later he left. Now when Judah... What?
What happened? He didn't play Monopoly.
You know Monopoly's not in the Bible, huh?
Yeah.
What did they play?
They
Rook?
No, dreidel.
Dreidel. It must have been dreidel. When Judah sent the young... then Judah sent a young goat to the woman because she beat him so badly at dreidel. And he asked the men of the place, "Where is the woman who beat me at dreidel?" And they said, "There's no dreidel players here." And so he returned to Judah and said to his master, "I have not found her." And also the men of the place said that nobody was playing dreidel there. So Judah replied, "Let her keep the dreidel, or we'll be laughed at." So about 3 months later, Judah told Timnah, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been playing dreidel with people. She is about to have children because she's so good at dreidel." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." Wow, he takes dreidel serious. She was being brought out, and she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these belong, I have won my dreidel game." And she said, "Please identify who these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff." And then Judah identified them and said, "She truly is more righteous than I, since I did not let her play dreidel with Shelah, but played dreidel with her myself." And then, when the time of her labor came, there were twins. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one has come out first." But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore he was called Perez. And afterward his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah. Now in a big disjointed shift, we go back to Joseph in chapter 39. So in the middle of the story of Joseph being sold to Egypt and rising to prominence, you have this little tidbit about Judah. Right? Pay attention to that. When there's a disjoint in stories, there's often a disjoint in the story for a reason. Right? So you have Judah at the very beginning of Joseph's account. Right? Judah is the one who says, "Let's sell him to the slavers." And now you have Judah in the middle, and you're going to have Judah at the end. So pay attention to Judah when he shows up. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelite who brought him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His wife saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. And so Joseph found favor in his sight, and attended him, and made him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. From that time he made him overseer in his house, and all that he had the Lord blessed the Egyptian house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Play dreidel with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has under my charge, he is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and play dreidel with you against God?" So she spoke to Joseph day after day, but he would not listen to her, to play dreidel with her, or to be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were there, in the house, she caught him by his garment and said, "Play dreidel." But he left his garment in her hand and ran away and got out of the house. As soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and that he had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has tried to play dreidel with me, to laugh at me. He has come in to play dreidel." And I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left and ran up out of the house, leaving his garment. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to play dreidel and laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, he rationalized that she's probably not telling the truth, and I should go speak to Joseph, who has always done right by me, and get his side of the story. Is that how this goes? No. Again, people are more likely to believe someone they're related to than they are to believe what is true. Right? And so when you are in life, you just have to be prepared for this. If you're in a situation where you are asking somebody to choose the truth or choose their spouse, very often people will choose their spouse. If you're asking a parent to choose the truth or choose their child, very often they will choose their child. So don't delude yourself with this idea that, oh, if I just tell people the truth, they will always want to listen. No. People don't want the truth often. People want what makes them comfortable. And what makes them comfortable, if you're a parent, is thinking that all my children are angels and always do what is right. If you're comfortable and you're married, the thing that makes you comfortable is thinking, oh, my spouse never does anything wrong. Right? That's more comfortable. So we would rather lie to ourselves and be comforted than have to deal with the harsh reality of truth. And that's just people. Okay? She can have pecan. Hey, Deborah, what is this? Say a pecan. Pecan. Good job. Now you can have it. Okay. All right. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were there. Whatever was done, he was the one who did it. And the keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. And so now you see the same thing. Joseph is in Potiphar's house. Potiphar doesn't have to care about anything because Joseph takes care of all of it. Now Joseph is in the prison. The prison guard, right, the jailer, he doesn't have to pay attention to anything because Joseph takes care of all of it. So later, when Joseph winds up in Pharaoh's house, what do you think is going to happen with Pharaoh?
Pharaoh doesn't have to care because Joseph is going to.
Pharaoh's not going to have to worry about anything because Joseph's going to take care of it. Okay? So Joseph is kind of a go-getter, very type A. Right? He's very much ordering and in charge, and he takes care of things. Right? So when you have people like that, you need to find roles that support their gifts. And these people recognized that Joseph was good at doing things, and so they put Joseph in charge of doing things. Right? And really, in Joseph's instance, it's God who is raising up Joseph. Right? The Lord is with him. In whatever way God is doing this, Joseph is becoming great because of God. All right, so chapter 40. Sometime after this, a cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. So very likely, it's the cook, right, the baker, the cook, and the cupbearer, the one who feeds the Pharaoh. Very likely, somebody tried to poison Pharaoh. Or maybe he got very sick from something he ate. And so he puts the people who in prison who most likely would have poisoned him. The one who prepared the food and the one who served him the food. Right? And so these people are in prison.
Didn't he have a tester?
That's who the cupbearer is. Yeah,
so maybe Pharaoh's probably thinking maybe he tested it before he put the poison.
Yeah, either the cook poisoned the food and the cupbearer missed it. The cupbearer poisoned the food and the cook is innocent. Or the cook and the cupbearer were in cahoots to kill the Pharaoh. And so he has done a reasonable thing. He has put the two people in jail who are most likely to have tried to have him killed. Right? There is possibility that somebody else did it, but notice how Pharaoh hasn't killed them yet. He has put them in jail while there is an ongoing investigation, as we will find out later. So right away, when you're introduced to this Pharaoh, what does this tell you, just based off who is put in jail? What does this tell you about the Pharaoh?
He's a pretty reasonable guy.
Yes, Stephen.
He's smart.
He thinks things through. Yeah. Or he has advisors who help him think things through.
Yeah, he didn't just kill them.
Right. He doesn't seem to be a very bombastic, a very emotionally driven person. He seems to be very, and especially at a time when you're at a very emotional thing, in the middle of a very emotional moment, where somebody has tried to execute, to murder you, right, to poison you. That would tend to get you emotional. Right? That's a very personal thing, somebody trying to kill you. Okay, so already we can kind of see good things about the Pharaoh. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with these two, and he continued with them for some time. And then one night they both dreamed, the cupbearer and the baker and the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, each his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. And when Joseph came into them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled, and so he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody. He asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" And they said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said, "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in his hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, so you get me out of this house. For I indeed was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into this pit." When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, "Okay, so what immediately do you see about the baker?" right? So when you're reading the Old Testament stories, you have to look for the clues that are present in the text. Not everything is spelled out for you directly, and so you have to find what the text gives you that you can work with to figure out who you're dealing with. All right, so what in the text, I'm going to read you the sentence again. Tell me what you can know about the cupbearer, the baker. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, Stephen?
He wants good news.
Okay. What else?
He didn't want to go first.
Yeah, he didn't want to go first and he might have felt guilty.
Yeah. He apparently did not want to go first. I doubt that they had a thumb wrestling war to see who got to tell their dream first. And so the cupbearer goes, and when the baker sees that Joseph's handing out good interpretations,
I want one.
no, I want one too, right? So he's probably guilty, right? And he didn't want his dream interpreted until he saw that the other dream got a favorable interpretation. And he probably noticed how similar the dreams were. And he assumes, very likely, that Joseph is just like all the other soothsayers that he has ever met in his life. And he's probably figured out that a large portion of the soothsayers, they're just making things up. And it seems like Joseph is making up good things. And so, if he's going to start saying good things about the dreams that we've had,
You'd like that comfort?
I would like that comfort, right? And yeah,
It's just silly because it's made up. Or so he thinks.
Does Joseph make himself seem like God? Because he says the dreams you have, only God can interpret them, and he says, let me hear them.
yeah. So Joseph we tend to build people up in the Bible and make them better than they are. Yeah, the baker's the imposter. That's right. He's definitely sus. We tend to build people up, these people in the biblical stories, and turn them into heroes. And Joseph is not, the Genesis account is not trying to show you Joseph as a hero. Right? It's telling you a story, and he's definitely mistreated. He's not punished equitably with his offenses, but he isn't innocent either. Right? You go back to the dreams that he has of his brothers, where he kind of is snarky to them, and his brothers hate him because of his words. Right? He definitely is not innocent. He is speaking in such a way that he instills hatred in other people. That's not good. Have you ever had somebody talk to you and you really didn't like them when they were done talking? Yeah, that's Joseph. That's who he is. Not only that, the father is he shows favoritism to Joseph. And I'm sure Joseph probably rubbed that in his brothers' faces. He probably put on little fashion shows with his coat. Hey guys, check out my coat. Right? And I'm sure that they loved him for that. And when he went to go look at his brothers, after his brothers, he gave his father a bad report. Right? That phrase is really important. Bad report. When's the next time that bad report shows up? Stephen?
With the Israelite spies.
With the spies that go out into the land and they bring back a bad report. Okay, so you have to connect that. Right? The bad report of Joseph with the bad report of the spies. Was the bad report of the spies a good thing?
No, it's bad.
Not good,
No.
right? So what happened is the bad report is that the spies went and they came back and they told the Israelites facts. There are giant walled cities. There are huge people that made us feel like grasshoppers. The bad report is the way they interpreted those facts. Push it down. They came back to the Israelites and said, there's no way we can win. They're going to kill us all. Right? That's the bad report. So Joseph went and spied out his brothers and looked at them and saw facts. But then he chose to interpret those facts in a bad way. When he comes back to his father, the bad report that he gives is probably taking things that really happened, but then twisting it to make his brothers seem bad. Okay, so Joseph is not innocent. It's not as though Joseph has done nothing, right? He has done things that are wrong. Now, has he done things to the point where he deserves to be thrown into prison and sold to slavers, or thrown into a pit and sold to slavers, and then thrown into prison? Probably not that bad. So there is some injustice, but he's not innocent. And here, actually, Ania, it's interesting that you picked up on that, because he does kind of associate himself with God, doesn't he? The interpretation belongs to God. Tell me. You're supposed to pick up on that. Because later, when he is elevated to the second position in Egypt, right, he would have been involved with Egyptian religion. He is married to the high priest's daughter. He himself is a priest, very likely involved in the priesthood of Egypt. Yes?
I have a question. Whenever he does all that stuff with his brothers.
Let's talk about that when we get there.
Okay.
All right, so we're just trying to set up the character of Joseph. So you should notice this when you're going along the story. Joseph does seem to be elevating himself, does he not? Yeah. So you're not given lots of information in the text, so you have to kind of pick that stuff up from what is there. It's expected that you will do those things. Right? The way that the story is being told to you, you're being given little bits of information, and it's expected that you will kind of fill in the gaps appropriately. So you see Joseph is kind of conceited. Right? He's been that way all along. Gloating about the visions that he's had, about his position that he will have over his parents, over his brothers, and here he is in the prison. Well, the interpretation belongs to God. Tell me. You're exactly right. Okay. So in 3 days, I also had a dream, Chief Baker. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked foods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days, and in 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you." I'm sure that the baker at that point was no longer happy with Joseph. On the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them in the dream, and yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Okay, so a couple things here. You should ask people for things when they're in a good mood. Right? It's Pharaoh's birthday. He's going to be gracious to the cupbearer because he's happy. Right? That really changes the answer that you get. If somebody is in a bad mood and you have a really important thing that you need to ask them, cheer them up first and then ask them. Right? That's just the way people operate. And you see the truth of humanity in the scriptures. It doesn't try and gussy things up. It doesn't try and present Pharaoh as anything other than a human being. Here he is. He's in a good mood, so he forgives the cupbearer. Okay.
How
old
I mean,
is the
yeah, the
Pharaoh
cupbearer.
supposed to be?
He poisoned?
No, he forgives he brings the cupbearer back.
Oh, I thought so. The baker did it.
Well, yeah.
How would the
Baker got voted off.
How would
Anyways.
the baker do it in the cup
He's an
and not
imposter.
get poisoned?
And we all know it.
Don't know. We don't need to know the details.
The baker didn't want it, he wanted it to get through, right, to the Pharaoh, so he had to find a way.
There
so that-
would have been a
so
way to
he'd
do
be
it.
caught.
Somehow Pharaoh figured out that the cupbearer is innocent. And another lesson that you should pick up from this is don't expect people to remember you.
Oh yeah, the 2 guys who had the dream, they didn't remember Joseph.
Right. Well, the baker's dead.
Uh,
Kind of hard to remember him dead. But the cupbearer doesn't remember Joseph. Right? Do not expect people to go out of their way to do kindness to you unless it benefits them also. Right? This is also just the way that humanity generally operates. And the distinct thing about Jesus is that Jesus shows you a different humanity. Right? Jesus goes out of his way to do good things for you. Right? And that is what humanity is supposed to be like. The reality is that humanity is often nothing like Jesus. And you just have to deal with the cold reality that most people are not going to do good things for you unless it also benefits them. Now, believers, faithful followers of Christ, who are living the way that Christ has called us to live, should be different. Right? And so you, in your life, you should be thinking about how you can be different than this cupbearer. The cupbearer does not remember Joseph until it benefits him to remember Joseph. And now he feels kind of bad about it when he does. Right? He's like, oh man, I should have remembered him sooner, but I didn't. But that's just the way people are. Right? Humanity has become selfish. I mean, we're not always that way, but we have become that way. And the goal now is to become like Jesus, who is selfless. And so as you are going throughout your life, we find ourselves in the position of this cupbearer often. We have the opportunity to do good for somebody, and we should. But we might forget. We might become self-centered. We might be more worried about ourselves and our station and our circumstance. And we have to look past those things to the good of others. Like Jesus, who did not come to be served, but to serve. Like Jesus, who came to seek and to save the lost. And so Jesus shows us a new humanity, a better humanity, that is living for others instead of for self. And the cupbearer here shows us what humanity is like. The cupbearer is more interested in what he gets than he is in taking care of other people. Right? And so we have to realize that sometimes we're going to be like the cupbearer. And we need to try and not behave that way. Yeah.
I think you could also apply that to people seeking God when they need God and not remembering God when everything's going well, right? So like when we're brought low, the cupbearer was low in the prison, and he said, oh, Joseph, interpretation belongs to God. So then he wants to God to give the interpretation. And then he doesn't remember God again until, oh yeah, we need to know what's going on. And so then that's kind of like us with God, or can be. And we have to be careful that we don't just seek God only when we need him.
Well, it's still a selfish thing.
Yeah.
When it benefits you, you want the relationship with God. When it benefits your friends, sometimes you will have friends who don't treat you well all the time, but then as soon as they want something from you, or there's something that they think will be good, they'll be your friend again. Right? I had friends like that growing up.
No, don't eat his.
People who, when they wanted something from you, they were really nice, but then they're not nice to me the other time. And eventually you kind of figure out that they're not really my friends. Right? They're just using me for things. And unfortunately, there are many people who behave that way. But Christ has called us to be different. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, where you start dealing with reality on the ground. What kind of person are you going to be? Are you going to be like this cupbearer, who for good or bad, was really only interested in Joseph when it served him? Or are you going to be like Christ, who is interested in you, even when it costs him terribly? Right? What kind of person are you going to be? And so that's a question that the Bible is going to put in front of you often throughout the text. Is who will you be? Who are you going to be like God, or are you going to be like this? And it will be different people throughout time. Will you be like God, or will you be like Adam? Will you be like God, or will you be like Cain? Will you be like God, or will you be like Nimrod? Will you be like God, or will you be like the cupbearer? Right? You have to choose. All right? Any other questions? Didn't you have something about perfection?
No one told you that.
Oh yeah. I'm just wondering why you should try to be perfect if you never will be.
Yeah. The way that I would answer that is I would say that you should not try to be perfect. You should try to be faithful. And there's a difference. If you're trying to be perfect, then you're trying to do everything the right way so that you can have everything done the right way. And the reality is that you're serving a God who is so much greater and so much bigger and so much better that there's no way that you can ever do anything perfectly. Right? We can't love as well as God does. We can't know as well as God does. We can't do as well as God does. And so there's no way that we can attain to the level of perfection that God has. So instead of trying to be perfect, you should try and be faithful. So your faith is actually going to drive you forward to try and do things that please God. But you know, right, while you're doing these things, you know that what you're going to offer to God as your living sacrifice every day is not going to be good enough. Right? I am never going to love people as deeply, as richly, as purely as God does. But that's my goal, right? I want to be like that. So I'm going to strive to be better every day. But at the end of the day, even though what I have offered God is imperfect, my faith makes it acceptable. And so in Genesis chapter 15, which we read earlier, in verse 6, it says, "And Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness." And so Anea believed God, and it is counted to her as righteousness. And so when you bring things to God, you offer your life to him as a sacrifice, It is your faith that makes it acceptable. Right? The writer in Hebrews chapter 11, when it talks about Abel's sacrifice, how did Abel offer his sacrifice?
Not faithful.
Through Abel, not Cain.
Oh, with faith.
Yeah, let's go look. So in Hebrews chapter 11. All right. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, and God commended him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. So because Abel offered his sacrifice in faith, God commended him by accepting it. So God didn't look down and say, oh, Abel's sacrifice is perfect and pure, I will take it. God looked down and said, oh, Abel's sacrifice is offered through faith, I will commend it. And so it is God who made Abel's sacrifice acceptable. Not Abel. Abel didn't make it acceptable. God made it acceptable. And so again, you see the same thing. Abel offered a sacrifice in faith, and God, seeing that faith, counted it as righteousness. Abraham believed God, and God counted it as righteousness. Right? So all throughout the Bible, you're going to see people who trust in the Lord and do something, and God, seeing that faith, will count their actions as righteous. So that is how you offer something to the Lord, is you don't do it until it's perfect, and now, finally, because it's perfect, God will accept it. You do the best you can, because you trust, right? You have faith in God, and that faith drives you to do the best you can.
You love God,
Yeah.
to try your best.
And when you offer that sacrifice in faith and love, God sees it and commends it and accepts it. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and stop there. We'll begin reading tomorrow in Genesis 41.